One of the aspects of Goldeneye which has always intrigued me is its level design. Goldeneye's levels have more in common with real buildings and spaces than traditional video game levels. The player is given a list of objectives and expected to explore the levels to figure out the path forward. While not large enough to be considered true sandboxes, they do feel more open and approachable from different angles than a lot of first-person shooters from around 1997. Expansive levels like Surface are juxtaposed with deliberate base designs like Facility and Silo. Within these levels, not every space is intended to be utilised as a video game space. They exist to flesh out the world and make the levels seem larger in scale. Sometimes it's the little touches, but in some levels it extends to whole sections. The end result of this is that a lot of Goldeneye's levels have a lot of spaces that are redundant to the story or places that the player will never actively explore in their playthroughs. Yet they exist and range from curiosities to being outright interesting. In this video, I wanted to take some time to explore the parts of levels that I've always found insanely interesting, even when playing back on Nintendo 64. Some of these spaces are very obvious, but others I suspect a lot of players don't even know exist or have never explored themselves. To some this might not seem interesting, but I genuinely feel that a lot of Goldeneye's levels are some of the best ever crafted in the first-person shooters genre. So let's dive in and explore these levels. The first space in Dam that I find really interesting is this guardhouse here. The only reason that this is actually here is because in a deleted scene that was supposed to go at the start of Goldeneye, Bond actually breaks into this guardhouse and that's how he gets onto the dam at the start of the actual movie. And it's such a deep cut for the movie because it isn't even in the final movie. The version in the game is a bit more stripped down, but you can see there are details in here, as well as the fact that there are two guards, including this general who will come out if the alarm is triggered on the outside. Most players will never actually come inside here because the objective is on the outside wall, but I do think that this being here is such a nice little detail for fans of the movie. And of course I would be remiss if I didn't mention the island in the distance that you were originally supposed to be able to get to via a boat from the docks there. It's there, they didn't take it out, and I do think it's very fun that, you know, you can see it across the way, so it does make this area feel a bit more fleshed out. The other space that I don't think a lot of players see in this level is if you make your way past the third guard tower, you actually come to the end of the dam. And to the game's credit, there is another end to the dam. You can't do much here, there's no enemies, there's no items, there's not even anything worth taking note of. But the fact that this is here, the fact that they took time to put an end on the dam, means that the world just feels a bit more fleshed out because it feels like this is an actual space where people are passing through. And in my headcanon, I always like to think that on the other side of that tunnel is Runway, because in Runway there's a similarly blocked off entrance into a tunnel that you can't access, but it does have similarities, and in my mind all of this is kind of interconnected, which makes the world just feel that much more detailed. The final space I want to talk about on Dam is the docks area. This isn't in the movie at all, and as mentioned earlier on, this was probably going to play a much more important role in the level, but rather than removing it or making it inaccessible, you can still head down here and have a wander around. There's nothing really important going on down here, it's just here to add to the world, and I really enjoy the vibe of this space. In Facility, the air ducts have a lot of these like vents that kind of head nowhere, but they do kind of give you an idea of the complex nature of what the vent system in this building would be like. But I think the biggest intriguing thing about the opening part of this level is this here. I was always convinced as a kid you could find a way through here and crawl through the roof of the level. It always felt like such a tease that that area was just out of reach, but at the same time it felt so expansive. I also like in Facility how you have these sort of redundant corridors. They're kind of tucked far out of the way and you need to kind of explore the level if you want to get here, but it's just the fact that one, it's even here, and two, you get things like this notice board here and signs on the door, which they don't even need to put detail into these areas, but they do. But the final point is that not only that, if you look up in the corner here, you can actually see the air vent exteriors which we were crawling around in earlier. It's such a pointless bit of detail, but it adds so much to the world of this level because it makes it feel like the air ducts are all over the level, and if you can just get through that grate, you can go crawling around in them. How many people do we reckon have stopped over the years to actually take notice of this bit of detail? I can imagine it's not very many. The next area I'm going to talk about is this chamber here. Sometimes Dr. Dork ends up here. But 95% of the time, there's never any reason to actually come out to this room, and it's surprisingly detailed for a room that doesn't really have much going on in it other than Dr. Dork. There's guards here, there's computers here, there's scientists wandering around, there's even some gas cylinders that if you shoot will lock this entire area down and you'll die in here. And all this for a room that I'm guessing a lot of players have never even wandered into because it is kind of off the beaten path a bit in this level. But there are more of these rooms in the level, because as you're making your way towards Trevelyan, the game wants you to go down and meet up with him, but if you turn left here and head through this door, you'll find that there's not only guards in here, there's a whole room here that, you know, never has any purpose, there's no reason to ever come here. And then you head into the room next to it and you get to see this really cool metal grate that overlooks the area where Trevelyan's going to get shot later on. It's so cool that this is here, and obviously there's no reason for players to ever wander up here. It's just here to sort of add to the sense that this is a real space and that it's just here because it's probably used by the day-to-day workers. And there's another great example of this at the other end of the room. Most players will never climb these steps here, because once Trevelyan starts talking to you, a countdown kind of starts where everything kind of goes to heck. But this room exists here not only with guards inside, no idea what they're protecting, but if you head up top here, you get another view of the chamber with all the tankers in it. And again, there's absolutely no reason for this to exist in the gameplay, and the story will never bring you up here. In fact, most gamers probably just run past it heading to the exit. It exists as flavour to the main level, and it just adds to the lore of the world, which I really appreciate. Runway has that tunnel I discussed earlier on, but there's also a lot of detail on the outside of the facility that the player doesn't really get to see unless you kind of wander around to the side areas. There's also the areas at the side of the runway which kind of indicate the facility is much larger than we get to experience. But I think the funniest one on this level is if you run right to the end of the runway, you can see this really low-res texture sort of at the end of the runway, and if you look off the edge, you can actually look down and see the edges of the texture boundaries. It's one of the few times that this actually happens in the game without cheating, and I've always found it really curious because I would have assumed they would have just made that rock face a bit bigger at the bottom just to kind of hide the overlap there. In Surface, you get these watch platforms and you can make use of them if you really want to, but I don't really think there's much of a need, and I don't think many players end up making use of them. When you do climb up to the top of them, you can make use of your sniper rifle to look across the level. But I think the structure that really takes the interest for me in this regard is this one here. This is like a fully formed building. There's an interior, there's barrels inside, and it's got this really interesting shaped dome on the roof. And the nice thing is that you can actually go up top and take a look around from up there, which kind of makes me wonder if this was originally going to have a much more important purpose in the level. It feels a bit too detailed to just be a random lookout post, because if they really wanted to, they could have just put a normal lookout post here, but no, this feels like a much bigger deal. But it is a really cool structure and it has always fascinated me. The other interesting space in this level is the fact that you can get to the top of the Seven Eye satellite. If you head out from the comms room or through the door there, you can actually head up and explore this area up here. There's really nothing up here of note, and I think in Surface 2 there's a guard up here. It's just a really cool space, and you get to see a close-up look at the satellite dish and how it rotates, which also very cool little detail. They didn't really have to do that either. It also lets you kind of look across the level and just really appreciate just how wide in scale this one is. It's a really nice bit of detail for fans to kind of come up here and just sort of take in the atmosphere and the detail put into this, because they really could have just blocked this off. There was no reason to let the player come up here, but they did so because it fits into the world. The area in the bunker levels that intrigues me the most is actually this optional kitchen area here. In Service 1 it's not yet a kitchen area, but this exists because in the movie this is where Natalia goes to make her cup of coffee, and this is where she ends up surviving the bloodbath that Oromov and Xenia cause. And when you come back here in Bunker 2, you can see that it is a fully realised kitchen space with a kitchen countertop area there, as well as the air vent that Natalia tries to use in the movie. Maybe it's a coincidence, but I like to think not. So the next bit I'm going to look at here is the front of the ship in Frigate. This space has really got a lot of detail to say that there's not much going on here at all, and you can have a look around. You can see the ship and there's these weird chain things here. I'm assuming these are supposed to be part of the anchoring system. There's also a French flag here that is bizarrely stiff and yeah, definitely no wind today, but it's a space that the game never really invites you to come and explore, but you can come up front and enjoy the view. And part of the reason I suspect they didn't really think people would come here is because you can actually just walk through this sort of little wall here. Yeah, there's no collision on that, which is a bit odd. Another space is just above the helicopter at the back of the ship. You can see these missile launchers here, and you also can use this space to have a good look at the detail on top of the frigate. You can see there's a lot of structures up there, and this is probably the best space where you'll get a chance to look at them. And there's a lot of detail there to say that, you know, they don't really expect many people to actually look at the top of the frigate. There's also this space at the back of the frigate which doesn't really have much going on. It's a bit of an empty spot and it's not nearly as interesting as the front of the frigate, but at the same time it's really nice that you can actually walk from the front to the back and see what's going on in all these spaces. It's worth pointing out again, the game never actually instructs you or even guides you to this space, so this area here is completely optional. In Statue Park there's all kinds of little Easter eggs and nods that you'll notice when you're wandering around, but I think one of my favourites in this level is this slope over here, because you're able to walk to the top of it and you can have a good look around into both areas that you've not yet visited in the level and areas where, you know, you're not really supposed to be able to see at all. It's such an interesting vantage point because this level doesn't really give you this sort of verticality normally, so being able to see across these spaces kind of changes the perspective of the level a tiny bit. They could have blocked this off very easily. You can also go inside the hut here that is clearly taken from the surface levels and explore it a tiny bit. But you can also explore this weird shed right next to that hut, and there's a lot of interesting and varied items in here that I guess it's just sort of a dumping ground to sort of fill space, but when you kind of look at the details put in here, it is very peculiar. I also think that the opening section of this level has an interesting section as well, because as you come close to this gate you'll hear the helicopter that only shows up at the level's end, because the helicopter's actually spawned in much further in the distance over there. You can't really see it without sort of going out there in no clip mode, but the game kind of uses that as a staging area, and it means that if you come over here at the start of the level you can hear the helicopter even though you're not really meant to. Archives is a very detailed level, to say that most of this you'll be running past and not really paying any attention to. There's a lot of these cubicles and a lot of these weird little interrogation side rooms that are oddly detailed with chairs, tables, desk lamps and boxes that the only time I think you'll ever actually go into that room is if Natalia actually runs in there when she gets frightened. But these cubicles over here in particular, you don't really, you know, ever come over here. Natalia never runs to these spaces as far as I know, and they're just kind of here as window dressing to make this area feel a lot bigger than it actually is. There's also a lot of redundant rooms in this one. For example, this area at the back of the archives, it's never really visited, and it's a multi-level room as well, so you can kind of look up to the attic and down to the bottom floor at the same time. Again, the only time I think you'd ever come here is if Natalia runs here when she gets frightened. But the space in Archives that I've always been fascinated by is this outdoor area here. You can see that this is like a courtyard that's overlooked by buildings. There's windows from the building that look down into this space, and there's never any reason to ever come out here. It's such a weird space because you don't do anything here. There's no objectives that lead you out here, and yet it's here to add a sense of scale to the level because it feels like it's in the middle of a city, in the middle of St. Petersburg. And it just goes to show you that they are very willing to create spaces that are completely redundant in this game if it helps them to make the levels feel like more real places. And one of the windows that overlooks that courtyard actually leads us up to the attic. Now, the attic is only ever used in this level if Natalia gets scared. It's one of the places that she can run to. And outside of that, there's absolutely nothing up here. Yet it's such a huge and vast space that it almost makes you wonder if anything else could have been put up here to sort of fill this space out. The only things that really happen here are guards will occasionally come up to do patrols, and that's really it. In Depot, I think the most interesting space that is put into the level that has no use is this sort of train station here. As you can see, there's an armor there, but you can actually even go and run on the tracks and sort of run up to the tunnel, which is pretty fun. Again, this just exists here to show that this is a working depot with all kinds of trains that come in and out, but it's really nice detail to make it fun to explore the level. And it's not just this one, there are several that are closed off which you can't actually get into, but overall it really does just add to the world building and makes this feel like more than just a video game level. It feels like there's a lot of things going on here and that your journey through this level is only part of the story here. I would also be remiss if I didn't at least mention the bajillion warehouses in this level. There's a lot of them to find. Some of them are obvious, some of them are hidden. On the lower difficulties, there's a bunch of body armor hidden in each of them. While I personally find them quite frustrating, I can't deny the fact that them being here like that really does make this whole level feel a bit more lived in, because in most video games you would probably get 1 or 2 storage units. In this one you get like a dozen of them, and they're all kind of there for different purposes, most of which are not really relevant to James Bond or his adventures. In train, I've always found these little cubicles where people can sit on their train journey really interesting, because there's not just one of them, there's at least half a dozen of them, and they are oddly detailed for spaces that you never actually have to enter, and in some cases are even locked out of view. You can even see there's plenty of space for people to put their luggage, and it's not just one of them, like there's plenty of them in the game. It really does want you to feel like you are on a train. And with the cubicles comes the toilets. Yes, there's an obscene amount of toilets on this train. Let me tell you, in the UK, you cannot get a toilet for love or money on a train. There's usually 1 or 2, but on this train, there's just so many, and they're plentiful on this train, which is very peculiar. There's one detail in Control that has always made me wonder, like, who actually put that there and for what purpose, because I guarantee 99.9% of players will never have even noticed it. When you come down here and you grab the grenades, the remote mines from here, if you look up you can see that there's actually a vent hole in the roof. Now, as far as I know, there's no others in this level like that, and it does make me wonder, like, why is that even there, other than for the fact that they wanted to have a logical reason why there's a ton of oxygen for people to breathe down here. It's little details like that that really do add to the sense that the people that were making these levels really understood what they were trying to do. I've also always been fascinated by this peculiar area here, which seems to be full of lockers, and I can only assume that these are for the guards that man Janice's base, because there's no other reason why you'd have a bunch of lockers here like this, and why there'd be body armor on the floor like that. And the thing is, because most players are rushing to the level's end by this point, or they go down the other doorway which leads to the mainframe that you need to blow up, I suspect a lot of people have never actually stopped to have a look around that area. I also like that in this room with the mainframe that you have to blow up, for no reason at all other than to kind of make the base seem bigger, there's two sets of steps at the end of this area. There's absolutely nothing up here, and there's no reason that you'd ever want to come up here because there's no weapons, there's no secrets, there's no reward for heading up. But on both sides there is a second floor that exists purely, I assume, for storage purposes or whatever Janice needs that space for. In Caverns, the area that really captures my imagination the most is through these windows here. If you destroy these windows, you can actually look out into this underground lake, and you can see that there's sort of some sort of structure there heading from one side of the rock formation to the other. That's actually the tunnel that you see Janice in at the end of the level, so that's where that confrontation takes place, and it actually takes place above a huge body of water. Did they need to add that level of detail in? Absolutely not. Am I glad they did? Absolutely, because it makes this level feel like it's an actual base with sprawling parts that we don't actually get to see because it's not relevant to our journey. The final interesting location that I'm going to talk about is on Cradle. Now, when you start Cradle, you start on one of these struts here, and you run after Janice, you chase them down, and the idea is that you chase them through the central structure as they're running around. But if you kind of leave Janice be, you can actually head around the level and you'll find that there's actually two other struts. They're pretty much exactly identical to the original, but the game never directs you to come out here to check out these areas, and if you do, you'll find body armor, which can be incredibly useful on the 00 Agent difficulty. For me, it's the fact that they had to logically explain how this structure even stands. It's just really cool attention to detail, and as I mentioned, there's absolutely no reason to head out there because the game never instructs you to go down in that direction. It's just a reward for curious players who are curious enough to adventure out this far, because let me tell you, Trevelyan will never come down this way, and the only things you'll find this way are the body armor and sometimes the occasional spawning guard. And that's it for the exploration of Goldeneye's levels. Obviously there's probably so much that I've missed, but these are the ones that I'm aware of, these are the ones that I've been looking at since I was a kid, and these are the ones that I wanted to talk about in this video. If there are ones that I've missed that you think I should have pointed out, or that you'd like to see in a future version of this video, let me know in the comments. I'd love to check it out because I'm always so fascinated by Goldeneye and its level design. Even in its worst levels, Goldeneye has such an attention to detail for the time that really sets it apart from a lot of the first-person shooters released around that time.